I'd like to ask a question for the children, and hopefully the children will be able to understand everything that we talked about this morning, because it's not difficult, and I have some pictures to show you, so maybe you can follow along that way. Now suppose that you were going on a hike, and as you're walking along, you come to a man who is cutting a tree, and you see this man cutting the tree, and what would you say to him? Okay, all right, he's going to fall. You would warn him, right? What would you say? Got any ideas? All right. Okay, it's the wrong place to sit. You might tell him not to cut off the branch that he's sitting on, right? Some of you have dogs at home. Suppose that this was your dog, and you just fed your dog, and now he's biting you. What might you tell your dog? Right, I just gave you food. Right. Why does the food make a difference? Right, yeah, like you're caring for the dog. You might tell the dog, don't bite the hand that feeds you. Have you ever heard that expression? About 2,600 years ago, there was a man by the name of Aesop, and he wrote fables, and maybe you have a book of those at home. But one of Aesop's fables is called The Gardener and His Dog. And the gardener had a dog that was, running around, and he fell into a well that he had, and the wells were big wells that could hold a dog. They're not like the wells we have today. And so the man went over to the well, and he reached down in to help the dog, and the dog bit him. I guess the dog might have thought that he was trying to push him under and drown him. Or whatever the dog feared wasn't the case. The man was trying to help the dog, but instead the dog bites him. And sometimes people are this way too. That this expression that's up here that says don't bite the hand that feeds you is an expression that we hear people talking about today sometimes. When they might warn somebody not to do that because they are kind of like injuring somebody that's helping them. Maybe they're complaining about the food that mom has on the table. And they're fussing about it, and they say, I don't want to eat this. But after all, mom was showing you kindness to prepare a meal in the first place. And we kind of forget things like that sometimes. So, what do you think causes this kind of behavior? Why is it that, I'm not talking about a dog now, I'm talking about us. Like, why is it that people sometimes bite back? Why do we complain about the food on our table sometimes? Any ideas? Right, we're not thankful. Exactly. So I was reading different people's ideas about this. Not extensively, but I just did a little bit of reading about it. And unthankfulness was one of the first ones I came across. Disrespect was something else I came across. Sometimes people have an idea that they are entitled to something and they're not receiving that, and they feel like that's a reason to lash back at something that is being provided to them. Well, I would like to look at a Bible story today, kind of a big picture Bible story that can maybe help us to answer this question as well. I think those are right answers. Unthankfulness and disrespect and entitlement, I think those are right answers. But I think that I would like to think about it this way. Why aren't we thankful sometimes? So the story I want to talk about is from the book of Exodus and Numbers. It's about the children of Israel. And in the book of Exodus, the story starts with the children of Israel in slavery. Well, how did they get to a place of slavery? What happened first is that they were in Canaan and there was a famine. And Joseph was in Egypt. And Joseph was helping. He became very high in the government there, and he was helping to provide food to support them through the famine. And so during this time, he invited his family to come into Egypt. And so they came into Egypt during that time. And their lives were spared from the famine, and they made out well. And it was a few days. It was a few years, it may have been a long time, in fact, that they lived peacefully in Egypt, and they were multiplying and prospering. But then, after Joseph's whole generation died, there was another Pharaoh that rose up, and this Pharaoh felt threatened by the Israelite people. He saw this minority group, he saw that they're multiplying quickly, and he felt like, what if they rebel against us? And so he determined that the way that he's going to save Egypt is to enslave the people of Israel. And so these are some of the words, some of the phrases that you have in the book of Exodus chapter 1. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And the Pharaoh here, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. And as they were in that slavery, this was not just for a few years, this was multiple generations that they lived there as slaves. And then you know how God came through and used Moses to help deliver them. I might be better off if I follow my notes. And now they are, we're going to just jump over all the plagues and all those miracles that God did on their behalf. And now they're leaving Egypt. And I want you to watch the response of these people that God is like feeding, right? He's like providing for them. He's liberating them. He's like changing their lives completely around. Think about this. This is what these people said before they even crossed the Red Sea. They complained this to Moses. Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Why did they say this? Well, they were scared. They looked behind them and they saw that Pharaoh's army was coming behind them. And there was mountains and there was a sea. They were trapped and they felt like now we're going to die out here in the wilderness. And they didn't just ask God for help. They didn't say, God, we're in a corner. We don't know what to do. No, they were like saying, they were like biting. They were biting back. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. So what was God's response? Well, God opened up the sea. God didn't like torture them. He didn't whip them. He didn't call them names. He didn't talk badly to them. He said, in fact, this is what he said. Exodus 14, verse 13 and 14. This is what Moses said. Moses was following God's lead here. Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which we will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. Wow, that sounds like patiently waiting on the Lord, like Brother Joe was talking about. So they did not need to fight a battle. All they had to do was just still their hearts and wait expectantly, and God performed this tremendous miracle for them. So there's 7 examples, and this is the first one that we're looking at right now. The next one was about 3 days later, and the place is called Marah. And this is what happened. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. Therefore it was named Marah, and the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" So this time it's not recorded that they were complaining about wanting to go back to Egypt, but they were grumbling. They're saying, "What should we drink? Look, there's water here, but it's bitter." What was God's response to that? He did not chide them. He just said to Moses, the Lord showed Moses a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. And so he redeemed the water for them. And Moses, and there's a little bit more to this story about God's response. And this is Exodus 15, verse 25 and 26. God wanted to do a test for them, just to see what kind of people this was. So Moses had cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule. And there he tested them, saying, listen, this is what the Lord was going to say. If you diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer. So maybe the people were worried that they were going to get sick like they were in Egypt. And God's saying, look, if you obey me, you will not get sick. All right, about 6 weeks later, as they were still in the wilderness, just at the early part of their journey still, they ran into another problem. And again, they didn't just ask for food. Listen to how they were talking to Moses. Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Children, did Moses bring the people out into the wilderness to kill them with hunger? No. No, he didn't. So what's God going to do about this one? Again, God did not scold them. He didn't say, oh, you rebellious people. No, he said, behold, I'm going to rain bread from heaven for you and the people. And the people shall go out and gather a portion every day. So this is where he gave manna and quail. And I'm going to read a few more verses here from chapter 16, 4 to 7. The Lord said to Moses, behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day. And God's doing a test here. Listen. That I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. On the 6th day they shall prepare what they bring in. It will be twice as much as they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, "At evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we that you grumble against us?" So again, God was going to do a test here on the people of Israel, and so just to see what kind of people they were, and so to do that test, he gave them bread every day. All right, the fourth example is at a place called Rephidim. And this one is in chapter 17 of the book of Exodus. This time there was no water for the people to drink. Remember the last time there was a water issue? It was bitter water. They had water, but it was bitter. Well, they had moved on, and so at this new place there was not water. There was no water for the people to drink. Therefore, the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They're almost ready to stone me." What did God do? Again, no scolding, no reproving, no "I'm going to teach them a lesson" type of response. God simply said, "Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink." And that's exactly what happened. Now, the next one I don't have pictures for, but I might just take the time to read this one. And this time we're skipping ahead to the book of Numbers. Numbers chapter 11. And I should have marked out just to read some of this because it's going to be a fair amount of reading. But let's just get started here. Numbers chapter 11. The people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes, and when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. I believe that this is the first time, it's at least the first time in 7 different things that I'm going through today, it's the first time that God responded with anger. He got angry because of the complaining of people again. Then the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So the name of that place was called Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burned among them. Now the rabble that was among them had a strong craving, and the people of Israel also wept again and said, "Oh, that we had meat to eat! We remember the fish we ate in Egypt that cost nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at." Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its appearance like that of bdellium. Verse 10, Moses heard the people weeping throughout their clans, everyone at the door of his tent. And the anger of the Lord blazed hotly, and Moses was displeased. Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you dealt ill with your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight, that you lay the burden of all this people on me?" I believe that Moses had finally also kind of reached the end of his rope, if you will, and he was also complaining to God. He's like, "Why do I have all this burden?" Maybe he was feeling burnt out. Did I conceive all this people? Did I give them birth that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing child to the land that you swore to give their fathers? Where am I to get meat to give to all this people? For they weep before me and say, give us meat that we may eat. I'm not able to carry all this people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If you would treat me like this, kill me at once if I find favor in your sight, that I may not see my wretchedness. And actually, I think that's all that I will read. But there's two responses that God gives. The one is that he gives help to Moses. He says, look, put men around Moses that he can delegate responsibility. I will give them some of the Spirit of God that he has. And the other thing was that he sent quail into the camp to feed the people. So again, God responded very graciously, in spite of the fact that he did get angry for the people complaining yet again. That was the two responses there. The sixth one that I want to look at is the evil report of Canaan. You remember that Moses sent spies into Canaan to look at the land that they're ready to go in and inherit? But this is how the people responded when they heard that evil report that came back. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives, our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. This, I believe, is the second time, the second time that God's anger was stirred toward this people. They were like biting back so much at the hand that fed them, so much so that when God was like ready to bring them into Canaan, they refused by unbelief. And I don't have a picture for you on this one, but God's response was this: how long will this people despise me? How long will they not believe me in spite of all the signs that I have done among them? I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you, Moses, a nation greater and mightier than they. This is a remarkable account. God was ready to say, I'm done with that dog biting my hand. He was ready to say, I'm gonna get another people. I'm gonna raise up another people. And Moses this time interceded. And he pled with God and reasoned with God and said, what are the people around going to think if you kill everybody? They're going to think that sure enough, God did bring the Israelites out here to die. And what kind of God is that? And so God recognized that, and Moses was able to intercede successfully for the pardon of the people. However, I do want to read this part from the book of Numbers, chapter 14, starting in verse 26. A few verses here. The Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, how long shall this wicked congregation grumble against me? So this was after God did pardon them, but I think God's like standing back and just wanting to have this conversation. How long is this wicked congregation going to grumble against me? I have heard the grumblings of the people of Israel, which they grumble against me. Say to them, as I live, declares the Lord, what you have said in my hearing, I will do to you. Your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and all of your number listed in the census from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me, not one shall come into the land where I swore that I would make you dwell, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. But your little ones, who you said would become a prey, I will bring in, and they shall know the land that you have rejected. But as for you, Your dead bodies shall fall in the wilderness. So what happened is that the people were murmuring again and again that God brought them out to die in the wilderness. And God's saying, look, if that's who you think I am, if that's what you're expecting of me, I will let you die in the wilderness. Sometimes people refer to this kind of phenomenon as a self-fulfilling prophecy, where because people expect evil, they actually end up getting it. There is one more example I want to look at yet, and that is at Meribah. This story of Meribah is very similar in many respects to the earlier story about needing water in the wilderness. It was the same predicament and very much the same solution, almost. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It's no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there's no water to drink." God's response, like I said, was very similar but slightly different as well. He did not chide with the people. He did not, it doesn't appear that he got frustrated with them at all. But I think that God was making a plan here in his mind that I'm going to do something to convince these people that I really care for them. And so he told Moses, take the staff and assemble the congregation. Right? He wants people to gather around and see what's going to happen. You and Aaron, your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them and give drink to the congregation and their cattle. So the difference here, the primary difference here, is that before God had told Moses to strike the rock, excuse me, this time he said just to speak to the rock. Imagine how awesome that would be to have the whole congregation standing around there, and Moses looks at the rock and just says a word to it, and out comes the water. Surely that would convince the people that God was very good and that he had plenty of supply for all their need. Well, what actually happened here is that Moses struck the rock. This time Moses flew off the handle, if you will. He got angry and he struck the rock a couple of times, and he says, "Here, rebels, you need us to bring water out to you?" He strikes the rock a couple of times, and out comes the water. God still graciously provided water, but God had a word for Moses after that, and he said, because you didn't sanctify me in the eyes of the people of Israel, you won't be able to enter the land of promise. Which is a very sobering thing to me, to think about the influence that we have in sanctifying God in the eyes of other people. Even though we're not Moses, we're not leading the people out of Israel yet. Moses as a type of Christ, and Christ as being the one we want to follow, we still look at Moses and say, we want to become like that. And here was a failure of Moses. And many times we see people fail in the same way too. And it's quite a sobering response. Well, after these 7 different examples that I've given you, I just want to point out this verse that Brother Joe had also read this last Sunday. Quite an amazing reflection of God looking back over the years of the wilderness experience. He said this to the psalmist, "For 40 years I was treated with contempt by that generation. And I said, they always go astray in their heart, and they do not know my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Remember that little picture I showed you in the beginning about biting the hand that feeds you? And we said that it's because people were unthankful, and I think that's correct. But I believe that the reason that these people could not seem to become thankful is because they were still, in their own minds, they were still slaves. They were like lashing out at God the way that they would lash out at their slave masters in Egypt. Can you imagine those whips cracking over the people? And they're screaming and they're probably cursing the people, their slave masters. And it seems like they just kind of figured that Moses and God are the same way. They didn't like change their mind about what kind of God it must be and what kind of heart he must have to like deliver them. He figured that they figured that the people that are over them are always oppressive. That's all they can imagine. That was all they knew for generations. And God says, here's the problem. They do not know my ways. That is why they always go astray in their heart. To illustrate this, I'm going to show you one more picture. Because I want to show this to you because I want to think about how you view somebody is how you, or when you view somebody, you kind of like have a certain impression of their character as well. And this is the picture I want you to look at. What are some quick words to describe this? Real quick. Angry. Grumpy. What was that? Sour? Sad. Right? Scary. Somebody you don't want to be around. What if I were to tell you that you could look at this same individual in a different way, and you would come to a different conclusion? How about this? How about looking at this and recognizing that this is not an angry person. This is not somebody who's scary or grumpy. No. This is actually someone who's gentle and kind. This is someone who's friendly and attractive. This is somebody that draws us. This is not the slave master. This is somebody who is desirable to you. And you want to be like that person. And this picture is not to illustrate God. This picture is to illustrate how one image can have two completely different takes just by whether or not we're standing on our head to look at it. Whether we're right side up or upside down. Why does this matter? I think it matters so much because we become how we perceive God to be. You know that? We become how we perceive God to be. Sometimes we ask the question, Charles Sheldon popularized this little question, what would Jesus do? And it's a good question to ask, and it's a worthy thing to try to follow that. But sometimes, if our perception is upside down, we end up going the wrong direction because we have a wrong perspective of God, of Jesus, and we can't even properly answer the question, what would Jesus do? Because we're not seeing it clearly. It also matters because all goodness, I believe that all goodness flows out of recognizing God's goodness. All goodness in us flows out of that. Whether it's thankfulness, or righteousness, or obedience, or endurance, or restfulness, or mercy, or patience. And you can make that list as long as the virtues you want to have. All goodness and virtue flows out of understanding that God is the source. He is the good one that we can and want to be like. Amen.